The millionaire put a hidden camera in his daughter's room to watch the nanny. But what he discovered about his 7-year-old daughter is shocking. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The autumn wind whistled through the towering oak trees surrounding Nathan Collins' estate in Westchester County, New York, carrying with it the crisp scent of dying leaves and the weight of unspoken tensions. The sprawling colonial house, with its white pillars and perfectly manicured lawn, stood as a testament to his success in the tech industry. But tonight, it felt more like a fortress under siege. Nathan stood in his mahogany-paneled home office, his calloused fingers trembling slightly as he held the tiny wireless camera between his thumb and forefinger. At 38, he possessed the kind of lean, angular face that had graced the covers of tech magazines, sharp jawline, steel-gray eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and prematurely silver hair that he kept meticulously styled. But tonight, those same eyes that had once commanded boardrooms filled with uncertainty. "This is for Emily's safety," he whispered to himself, the words echoing in the silence of the room, lined with leather-bound books and awards from his software company, Technova Solutions. The grandfather clock in the corner, a family heirloom from his grandmother, ticked away the seconds like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. The divorce papers lay scattered across his oak desk, still bearing the fresh ink of lawyers' signatures. 6 months of bitter legal battles with his ex-wife Lily had drained him emotionally and financially. But worse than that, they had created a chasm between him and his 7-year-old daughter Emily that seemed to widen with each passing day. Nathan's hands clenched into fists as he remembered the conversation with his attorney just hours earlier. Marvin Green, a silver-haired legal veteran with piercing blue eyes and a reputation for winning impossible cases, had been brutally honest about Nathan's chances. "Listen, Nathan," Marvin had said, leaning back in his burgundy leather chair in his Manhattan office, surrounded by law books and framed diplomas. "Lily's got a strong case. She's the biological mother. She's got a stable living situation in her Soho studio, and frankly, the courts tend to favor mothers in custody disputes involving young children, especially daughters. But I can provide better stability," Nathan had argued, his voice rising with desperation. "I have the financial resources, the bigger house, better schools." "Money isn't everything in family court," Marvin had interrupted, adjusting his burgundy tie. "Lily's arguing that Emily needs emotional nurturing, creative expression, cultural diversity. She's painting you as a workaholic who sees parenting as another business problem to solve." The words had stung because they carried a grain of truth. Nathan's childhood had been marked by emotional distance, parents who were physically present but emotionally unavailable, leaving him to navigate adolescence feeling powerless and unheard. He had sworn to be different with Emily, but somewhere along the way, his fear of failing as a father had manifested as an obsessive need to control every variable in her life. Now, as he climbed the curved mahogany staircase to the second floor, Nathan's footsteps muffled by the plush Persian runner, he tried to convince himself that installing the camera was a reasonable precaution. The new nanny, Sophia Reyes, had been in their home for only 2 weeks. While her references were impeccable and Emily seemed to like her, Nathan needed concrete evidence that he was providing the most stable environment for his daughter. Sophia was 26, with warm brown eyes and thick black hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had immigrated from the Dominican Republic 5 years earlier and was working toward a degree in child psychology through night classes at the local community college. During their interview, she had spoken passionately about child development, her accented English flowing with genuine enthusiasm. "Mr. Collins," she had said, sitting straight-backed in the formal living room with its cream-colored furniture and crystal chandelier, "children are not small adults. They see the world differently, feel things more intensely. My job is not just to keep Emily safe, it's to help her understand her own emotions and develop her own voice." Nathan had been impressed by her credentials and references, but tonight, doubt gnawed at him. What if Sophia was manipulating Emily against him? What if she was feeding information to Lily's legal team? What if she was documenting his parenting failures to use against him in court? He paused outside Emily's bedroom door, painted a soft lavender color that Emily had chosen herself 6 months ago, back when the family was still intact. The door was adorned with a wooden nameplate featuring dancing unicorns, a gift from Lily that Nathan had grudgingly allowed to remain. Through the slightly open door, he could hear Sophia's gentle voice reading from a chapter book. Emily's room was a carefully curated blend of childhood wonder and educational stimulation. Built-in shelves lined with books ranging from picture books to young adult novels, a play area with colorful building blocks and art supplies, and a cozy reading nook by the window overlooking the garden. And as Charlotte spun her web, she thought about friendship and sacrifice. Sophia was reading, her voice carrying the lilting rhythm of her Dominican accent. "Sophia!" Emily's small voice interrupted. Why did Charlotte decide to help Wilbur even though she knew it would be hard for her? Nathan froze. His daughter's question revealed a depth of understanding that surprised him. At 7, Emily was asking about moral complexity in a way that seemed far beyond her years. "That's a beautiful question, mi amor," Sophia replied warmly. "What do you think? Why do we sometimes choose to help others, even when it's difficult for us? Maybe because when you love someone, their happiness becomes part of your happiness." Emily suggested, her voice thoughtful and mature. Nathan felt his breath catch. When had his daughter become capable of such profound insights? During their brief weekly visits, their conversations rarely moved beyond homework and weekend plans. He realized with a sharp pang of guilt that he had been so focused on providing for Emily's physical needs, the best house, the best schools, the best opportunities, that he had failed to truly listen to her thoughts and feelings. He crept closer to the door, the floorboard creaking slightly under his weight. The camera in his hand suddenly felt heavier, more intrusive. Through the crack in the door, he could see Emily curled up in her twin bed, with its white wooden frame and unicorn-themed bedding, her blonde hair, so much like Lily's, fanned across the pillow. Sophia sat in the rocking chair beside the bed, the same chair where Nathan used to read bedtime stories before his work schedule became overwhelming. "Time for sleep now, pequeña," Sophia said gently, closing the book and placing it on the nightstand next to a family photo. Nathan, Lily and Emily at last year's Christmas, all smiling, all unaware that their world was about to shatter. "Sophia?" Emily's voice was small in the growing darkness. "Do you think my daddy loves me?" The question hit Nathan like a physical blow. His hand instinctively moved to the doorframe for support. "Oh, Emily," Sophia's voice was filled with tenderness. "Your daddy loves you more than anything in the world. Sometimes adults get scared and confused, especially when they're hurting. But that doesn't change how much they love their children." "I just want everyone to stop being angry," Emily whispered, and Nathan could hear the tears in her voice. "I want Mommy and Daddy to be happy again." Nathan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his daughter's pain. This is exactly why he needed the camera. Not to spy on Sophia, he realized, but to understand what Emily was truly experiencing when he wasn't around, to bridge the gap that his own emotional limitations had created. Waiting until Sophia's footsteps faded down the hallway toward the guest room, Nathan slipped into Emily's bedroom. The room smelled of the lavender lotion Sophia used during Emily's bedtime routine, and the faint vanilla scent of the nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. Emily's breathing had already settled into the gentle rhythm of sleep. Moving carefully in the darkness, Nathan positioned the camera behind a stuffed elephant on Emily's bookshelf, one of dozens of toys that Lily insisted were essential for imaginative play, but that Nathan had always viewed as clutter. The camera was virtually invisible, no bigger than a quarter, and would provide a clear view of most of the room. As he made the final adjustments, Nathan's eyes fell on Emily's sleeping face. Even in the dim moonlight, filtering through her white curtains, he could see the stress lines around her eyes, too mature for a 7-year-old. His driven personality, the same trait that had built his tech empire, had somehow failed him as a father. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he whispered into the darkness. "I'm going to do better. I'm going to figure out how to protect you." He activated the camera with his smartphone app, watching as the feed came online with crystal clarity. This small device would capture everything: Emily's daily routines, her interactions with Sophia, her unguarded moments when she thought no one was watching. Nathan told himself it was necessary protection, a tool to ensure Emily's well-being and strengthen his custody case. But as he quietly left the room and returned to his office, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a line he might not be able to uncross. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, and outside, the October wind continued to scatter golden leaves across the lawn, each one a reminder that some changes, once set in motion, can never be reversed. The footage would begin recording tomorrow, and Nathan Collins had no idea that what he was about to discover would fundamentally challenge everything he thought he knew about his daughter, himself, and the very nature of the love that binds families together. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Emily's bedroom, casting dancing shadows across the hardwood floor as Nathan sat hunched over his laptop in his home office, watching the live feed from the hidden camera. It had been 3 weeks since he installed the device, and what he initially expected to be evidence of potential negligence or manipulation had instead revealed a routine that was both comfortingly normal and subtly extraordinary. On his screen, he watched Sophia enter Emily's room at exactly 7:02 a.m., just as she had every morning since the camera began recording. Sophia moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that mornings could set the tone for an entire day. She was dressed in dark jeans and a soft yellow sweater, her hair braided back in a way that Emily had recently started copying. "Buenos dias, sleeping beauty," Sophia whispered, gently shaking Emily's shoulder. "Time to wake up and greet the day." Emily stirred beneath her unicorn print comforter, blonde hair tousled from sleep. At 7 years old, she possessed an ethereal quality that reminded Nathan painfully of Lily at that age. Delicate features, expressive green eyes, and an intelligence that seemed to radiate from within. 5 more minutes, Emily mumbled, burying her face in her pillow. Sophia laughed softly, the sound warm and musical. "You said that yesterday and the day before. Come on, mi amor, we have a big day ahead of us." Nathan found himself leaning closer to the screen, studying the easy rapport between his daughter and the nanny. During his own morning routines with Emily, the brief 20 minutes before his driver arrived to take him to the city, their interactions felt stilted, focused on practical matters like brushing teeth and eating breakfast. He had never seen Emily exhibit the relaxed affection she showed with Sophia. "Sophia," Emily said, sitting up in bed with her hair sticking up at odd angles, "can I ask you something kind of weird?" "There are no weird questions, only curious minds," Sophia replied, sitting on the edge of the bed and helping Emily untangle her hair. "What's on your mind?" Emily was quiet for a moment, her small fingers picking at the edge of her comforter. "Do you think some people can feel what other people are feeling? Like really feel it?" Nathan's fingers paused over his coffee cup. Where was this question coming from? Sophia's hand stilled in Emily's hair. "That's a very thoughtful question. There are people who are very sensitive to others' emotions. We call them empaths. They can sense when someone is sad or happy or worried, even when that person is trying to hide it." "Why do you ask?" "Sometimes when Daddy comes home from work, I can feel how tired he is, even before he says anything," Emily said quietly. "And when Mommy calls, I know she's been crying even though she tries to sound happy." Nathan set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. He had always prided himself on maintaining emotional control, especially around Emily. During their custody evaluations, he had presented himself as stable and composed, the rational alternative to Lily's emotional volatility. But apparently, His 7-year-old daughter could see right through his carefully constructed facade. "That sounds like you have a very special gift," Sophia said gently, resuming her careful work with Emily's hair. "But it can also be a heavy responsibility, feeling so much of what others feel." "How does that make you feel?" "Sometimes it's scary," Emily admitted. "Like when adults are upset but pretending they're not. It makes my stomach hurt." Nathan's throat tightened. How many times had he come home frustrated from work or stressed about the custody battle, thinking he was successfully hiding his emotions from Emily? How many times had his daughter absorbed his anxiety while he remained obliviously focused on his own concerns? The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Nathan's footsteps in the hallway. He watched on screen as Emily's demeanor immediately shifted, her shoulders tensing slightly, her expression becoming more guarded. It was subtle, but the change was unmistakable. "Good morning, sweetheart," Nathan's voice came through the camera's audio as he appeared in the doorway. On screen, he looked every inch the successful executive. Charcoal grey suit, crisp white shirt, hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. But now, watching from his office, he could see what Emily saw. The tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted to his watch, the invisible barrier of stress that surrounded him like armor. "Morning, Daddy," Emily said, her voice notably more subdued than it had been moments before with Sophia. "Don't forget you have your piano lesson after school today," Nathan said, consulting his phone. "And tomorrow is your session with Dr. Martinez for the custody evaluation. I'll pick you up from school myself." Nathan watched Emily's face on the screen and saw her flinch slightly at the mention of the custody evaluation. He had presented these sessions to her as routine meetings, but clearly she understood their true significance. "Okay, Daddy," Emily said quietly. "Make sure you eat a good breakfast," Nathan continued, already backing toward the door. "Sophia, the car service will pick Emily up at 8:15 for school." "Of course, Mr. Collins," Sophia replied professionally. As Nathan's footsteps faded down the hallway, he watched Emily's posture relax again. The transformation was heartbreaking, like watching a flower close its petals at the first hint of storm clouds. "He's worried about me, isn't he?" Emily asked Sophia, her young voice carrying a weight that no child should bear. Sophia sat back down on the bed, her brown eyes filled with compassion. "Adults worry because they love. Your daddy loves you very much, Emily. Sometimes that love comes out as worry instead of joy. But it's still love. I wish I could make him less scared," Emily said. And Nathan had to grip the edge of his desk to steady himself. "That's not your job, Pequeña," Sophia said firmly but gently. "Your job is to be 7 years old, to play and learn and grow. The adults in your life will figure out their worries." Nathan paused the video, unable to continue watching. His daughter, his 7-year-old daughter, was carrying the emotional burden of her parents' divorce, somehow intuiting their fears and anxieties while trying to navigate her own confusion and pain. He had been so focused on winning the custody battle that he had failed to consider what the battle itself was doing to Emily. He fast-forwarded through the morning routine, watching Emily get dressed in her school uniform, navy blue skirt, white blouse, navy cardigan with the Riverside Academy crest. The private school had been his choice, selected for its academic reputation and college preparation programs. Emily attended dutifully, but Nathan realized he had never asked her if she actually enjoyed it. The camera captured Emily's backpack sitting open on her desk, revealing an array of textbooks that seemed advanced for a second grader. Nathan zoomed in on the titles: Introduction to World Cultures, Beginning Spanish, Advanced Mathematics for Young Learners. When had Emily's curriculum become so sophisticated? He had signed off on the course selections, but seeing the actual books drove home just how academically demanding her schedule had become. "Sophia?" Emily's voice drew his attention back to the main action. She was fully dressed now, sitting at her small desk chair, while Sophia braided her hair. "Can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, mi amor." "Sometimes I read Daddy's books," Emily said quietly. "The ones in his office?" "I don't think he knows." Nathan's eyebrows shot up. His office was filled with technical manuals, business strategy books, and complex theoretical texts about artificial intelligence and software development. What could Emily possibly understand from such material? Which books? Sophia asked, her voice carefully neutral. There's one about how people think and make decisions, Emily said. It talks about how emotions affect the choices people make, even when they don't realize it. I think Daddy reads it because he's trying to understand why people do things that don't make logical sense. Nathan's breath caught. He knew exactly which book Emily was referring to. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, a dense exploration of cognitive psychology and decision-making that he had been studying to better understand his divorce proceedings. The idea that his 7-year-old daughter had not only accessed this book, but comprehended its concepts well enough to analyze his motivations was staggering. That sounds like a very grown-up book, Sophia said carefully. Most books are easier than people think, Emily replied matter-of-factly. The hard part isn't understanding the words. The hard part is understanding why adults make things so complicated when the answers are usually simple. Nathan stared at the screen, his carefully ordered worldview beginning to crack around the edges. He had always known Emily was bright. Her teachers consistently praised her academic performance, but this level of insight and analysis suggested an intelligence that went far beyond precocious. This was the kind of intuitive understanding that some adults never developed. The morning routine continued with Emily eating breakfast while reading a book that Nathan now realized was far above her supposed grade level. She moved through her tasks with an efficiency that mirrored his own, but without the underlying tension that drove his every action. She was methodical without being anxious, focused without being obsessive. As he watched Sophia prepare Emily's lunch with careful attention to nutritional balance and Emily's preferences, Nathan realized that in the 3 weeks of footage, he had never once seen Sophia lose patience, raise her voice, or display any of the stress that seemed to constantly plague him. She approached childcare the way he approached software development, with systematic attention to detail, but her system was built on empathy and emotional intelligence rather than rigid control. The most unsettling moment came just before Emily left for school. As she gathered her backpack and jacket, she paused in front of her bedroom mirror, the same mirror that unknowingly concealed the hidden camera. "I know you're watching, Daddy," she said quietly, looking directly into the lens with those piercing green eyes. "And I hope the camera helps you feel less worried about me." Nathan's coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering against the hardwood floor of his office. Emily couldn't possibly know about the camera. He had been meticulous in its placement and concealment. But as he stared at his daughter's knowing expression on the screen, a chill ran down his spine. Either Emily was far more perceptive than any 7-year-old should be, or something extraordinary was happening in his house, something that his rational, technology-focused mind was completely unprepared to understand. The timestamp showed 8:10 a.m. In 5 minutes, Emily would leave for school, and Nathan would be left alone with questions that threatened to undermine everything he thought he knew about his daughter, his family, and the nature of childhood itself. The November rain drummed steadily against the windows of Nathan's estate, creating a rhythmic backdrop to what would become the most unsettling day of surveillance yet. Nathan sat in his leather chair, steam rising from his 3rd cup of coffee as he reviewed the previous night's footage. What he discovered would force him to confront an uncomfortable truth. He had been living with a stranger who happened to be his own daughter. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. when Emily should have been deep in sleep. Instead, the infrared camera captured her sitting cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by books that definitely didn't belong in a 7-year-old's room. Nathan leaned forward, adjusting the brightness on his monitor to get a clearer view of the titles. His blood ran cold as he made out the spines. Advanced Cognitive Psychology, The Nature of Human Consciousness, and most disturbing of all, Emotional Intelligence in Gifted Children. Where had she gotten these books? The last title made his stomach lurch. It was the same book that Dr. Martinez, the court-appointed child psychologist, had recommended Nathan read before Emily's evaluation sessions. On screen, Emily was taking careful notes in a composition notebook, her small hand moving with the precise, deliberate strokes of someone far older. The camera's audio picked up her whispered voice as she read aloud to herself. Children with advanced emotional perception often struggle to reconcile their intuitive understanding with the simplified explanations adults provide, she read, her pronunciation of complex words flawless. This disconnect can lead to feelings of isolation and a tendency to hide their true capabilities to avoid making adults uncomfortable. Nathan's hands trembled as he paused the video. Emily wasn't just reading these books. She was studying them, analyzing them, and worst of all, applying them to her own situation. How long had she been doing this? How many nights had she been conducting her own research while he slept, oblivious to the brilliant mind operating just down the hall? He fast-forwarded to morning, watching as Emily carefully hid the books under her mattress before Sophia's arrival. The ease with which she concealed her nighttime activities suggested this was a well-practiced routine. When Sophia entered at 7 a.m. sharp, Emily was the picture of innocent childhood, rubbing sleepy eyes and asking for 5 more minutes just like any normal 7-year-old. But Nathan was beginning to understand that nothing about Emily was normal. "Sophia," Emily said during their morning routine, her voice carrying that deceptively casual tone that Nathan was learning preceded her most profound observations. "Why do adults think children can't understand complicated things?" Sophia paused in braiding Emily's hair, her reflection in the vanity mirror showing surprise at the question. "What makes you ask that, mi amor?" "Yesterday at school, Mrs. Henderson told us that some topics were too advanced for 2nd grade, Emily said, air-quoting with her small fingers. "But I looked up the topics she mentioned, and they weren't really that hard. They just required thinking about multiple things at the same time." Nathan zoomed in on Sophia's face, watching as the young woman struggled to formulate a response. In her 3 months working for the family, Sophia had clearly noticed Emily's exceptional abilities, but like all the adults in Emily's life, she seemed uncertain how to address them directly. Sometimes adults want to protect children from information that might be confusing or overwhelming, Sophia said carefully. "But what if the children aren't confused or overwhelmed?" Emily pressed. "What if they're just frustrated because everyone keeps treating them like they're less capable than they actually are?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Nathan realized that Emily wasn't just asking about academic material. She was describing her entire lived experience. How many conversations had he dumbed down for her benefit? How many times had he dismissed her questions as beyond her understanding? The morning was interrupted by the arrival of Nathan himself, and once again he watched Emily's demeanor shift subtly. But this time he noticed something new. Emily wasn't just withdrawing emotionally when he appeared. She was actively performing the role of a typical 7-year-old. "Morning, Daddy," she said with exaggerated brightness, bouncing slightly on her bed in a way that seemed calculated to project childlike energy. "Good morning, sweetheart," Nathan replied, his on-screen self scrolling through emails while talking. "Don't forget you have your Spanish lesson after school today. I love Spanish class," Emily exclaimed, and Nathan caught the slight glance she shared with Sophia, a look that seemed to communicate something beyond words. After his on-screen departure, Nathan watched Emily's shoulders relax as she dropped the performance. "He doesn't know I'm already fluent, does he?" Emily asked Sophia quietly. Nathan's coffee went cold in his hands. "Fluent?" Emily had been taking beginner Spanish lessons for 6 months. How could she possibly be fluent? Sophia's expression was conflicted, torn between loyalty to her employer and honesty with the child in her care. "Emily, your Spanish is very good, but maybe we should talk to your father about—" "Please don't," Emily interrupted, her voice carrying a weight of exhaustion that no child should possess. He already worries so much about everything. If he knew how different I really am, it would just make him more scared. The words hit Nathan like a physical blow. His daughter was deliberately hiding her abilities to protect his feelings. She was managing his emotions while he remained obliviously focused on managing her life. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Emily's tutor, Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes who came 3 times a week to help with homework. Nathan had hired her to ensure Emily stayed ahead academically, but as he watched the session unfold, he realized the true dynamic was far different than he had imagined. "Today, we're going to work on reading comprehension," Mrs. Chen announced, settling into the chair beside Emily's desk with a stack of books designed for 4th and 5th graders. "Mrs. Chen," Emily said politely, "would it be okay if I showed you something first?" Before the tutor could respond, Emily pulled out a notebook and opened it to a page covered with neat handwriting. "I've been thinking about the story we read yesterday, the one about the boy who found the magical key. I wrote down some questions about the themes and symbolism that I noticed." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose as she read Emily's notes. Nathan watched the older woman's face transform from patient condescension to genuine surprise, to something approaching awe. "Emily," Mrs. Chen said slowly, "these are graduate-level analytical questions. Where did you learn to think about literature this way?" "I read a lot," Emily said simply, "and I think about what I read." "Isn't that what you're supposed to do?" Nathan paused the video and stared at his daughter's innocent expression. Graduate-level analysis at 7 years old. While he had been focused on providing her with the best tutors and most rigorous curriculum, Emily had been quietly surpassing every academic expectation he had set for her. He fast-forwarded through the tutoring session, watching as Mrs. Chen struggled to keep pace with Emily's insights and questions. The elderly tutor, who held a master's degree in education and had taught for over 30 years, seemed genuinely challenged by her 7-year-old student. The most revealing moment came near the end of the session, when Mrs. Chen asked Emily about her favorite subjects. "I like psychology," Emily said matter-of-factly, "and philosophy. Also quantum physics, though some of the math is still hard for me." "Quantum physics," Mrs. Chen repeated. "Weekly. Daddy has some books about it," Emily explained. "It's interesting how scientists are starting to understand that consciousness might affect reality in ways we don't expect. It makes me wonder if what people call intuition might actually be a kind of quantum perception we don't have instruments to measure yet." Nathan rewound and replayed this section 3 times, each viewing making him feel more disconnected from the child he thought he knew. Emily wasn't just academically gifted, she was operating on a level of intellectual sophistication that challenged fundamental assumptions about childhood development. After Mrs. Chen left, clearly shaken by the encounter, Nathan watched Emily and Sophia settle into their afternoon routine. But instead of the typical activities he expected, art projects, playground time, educational games, Emily pulled out a worn journal and began writing with intense concentration. "What are you working on?" Sophia asked, settling beside Emily with her own textbook for her evening classes. "I'm trying to figure out how to help Mommy and Daddy," Emily said without looking up from her writing. "They're both scared that they're not good parents, but they're scared in different ways. Daddy thinks love means providing everything I need, so he works really hard to make sure I have the best of everything. Mommy thinks love means understanding how I feel, so she tries to connect with my emotions." Sophia set down her textbook, giving Emily her full attention. "That sounds very insightful. What are you writing?" "A plan," Emily said simply. "If I can help them understand what I actually need, maybe they'll stop fighting about who can give it to me better." Nathan's throat constricted as he realized what his daughter was doing. While he and Lily were battling in court over custody, Emily was conducting her own analysis of the situation, trying to find a solution that would heal her fractured family. She was approaching their divorce the same way he approached business problems, with systematic analysis and strategic planning. But her motivation was pure love rather than the need to win. The journal page was covered with neat columns and bullet points, too small for the camera to capture clearly. But Nathan could see the organizational structure that mirrored his own project management methodologies. Emily had inherited his analytical mind, but she was applying it to emotional intelligence in ways that he had never considered. As the afternoon faded into evening, Nathan watched Emily carefully return her advanced books to their hiding places and arrange her grade-appropriate materials for when he returned from work. She was living a double life, performing childhood for the adults around her while conducting sophisticated analysis of human behavior and family dynamics in private. The final shock came just before bedtime, when Emily knelt beside her bed for what Nathan assumed would be typical childhood prayers. Instead, he heard her whisper words that would haunt him for days to come. "Please help Daddy understand that I don't need him to be perfect," she said quietly. "I just need him to be real. And please help me figure out how to show him who I really am without making him feel like he's failed as a father." Nathan turned off the monitor and sat in the darkness of his office, the weight of revelation crushing down on him. He had installed the camera to monitor Sophia's care of his daughter, but instead, he had discovered that Emily had been monitoring and managing everyone around her with a level of emotional sophistication that exceeded his own. His 7-year-old daughter was not the child he thought he was protecting. She was an extraordinary being who had been protecting him all along, sacrificing her authentic self to maintain his illusion of successful parenting. The question that terrified him was simple. What else didn't he know about the remarkable stranger who called him Daddy? The December snow fell heavily outside Nathan's office windows, blanketing Westchester County in a pristine white that made the world appear deceptively peaceful. But inside the warm confines of his mahogany-paneled sanctuary, Nathan felt anything but peaceful as he stared at the email that had arrived at 6:47 a.m., marked urgent in red letters. The sender was Detective Marcus Rivera, a private investigator hired by Lily's legal team. Nathan's hands trembled slightly as he opened the attachment, a comprehensive surveillance report titled, "Parental Fitness Assessment, Nathan Collins." His heart sank as he scrolled through pages of photographs, timestamps, and detailed observations of his daily routines, work habits, and interactions with Emily. Subject maintains minimal physical presence in child's daily life, Rivera had written in his clinical, detached prose. Average time spent in direct interaction with minor, 23 minutes per weekday, 4.2 hours per weekend day. Subject frequently takes business calls during designated family time. Childcare responsibilities delegated almost entirely to hired personnel. Nathan's jaw clenched as he read the devastating assessment. Every criticism was technically accurate, but the report stripped away all context, all nuance, all evidence of his love for Emily. It painted him as a distant, work-obsessed father who treated parenting like another business obligation to be outsourced. The office door burst open without warning, and Marvin Green strode in, his usually immaculate silver hair disheveled and his burgundy tie askew. At 62, Marvin had the kind of commanding presence that could dominate a courtroom, but this morning he looked genuinely rattled. "Nathan, we need to talk," Marvin said, his voice tight with urgency. "Lily's team just filed a motion for emergency custody modification. They're claiming you're an absentee parent who's more interested in surveillance than actual child-rearing." "How could they possibly know about—" Nathan began, then stopped. "The hidden camera. Somehow they had discovered the camera. About the nanny cam you installed without informing the court?" Marvin's blue eyes were hard as steel. "Jesus, Nathan, please tell me you got legal advice before doing something this monumentally stupid." Nathan's face flushed hot with embarrassment and anger. "It's my house, my daughter. I have every right to ensure her safety. Not during a custody dispute, you don't." Marvin exploded, his professional composure finally cracking. "Do you have any idea how this looks? A control-freak father who can't trust his own parenting enough to be present. So instead he installs hidden cameras to spy on his child. Lily's attorney is going to crucify us with this." The two men stared at each other across the desk, years of professional relationships strained by the weight of poor decisions and legal consequences. Nathan had built his technology empire on calculated risks and strategic thinking, but somehow, when it came to his own family, every instinct had led him astray. "There's more," Marvin continued, settling heavily into the leather chair across from Nathan's desk. "Rivera's report indicates that Emily has been displaying what he calls concerning behavioral patterns. Advanced intellectual development that might indicate she's being pushed too hard academically. Emotional withdrawal when you're present. Signs of stress related to the custody proceedings." "That's ridiculous," Nathan protested. "Emily is thriving. Her grades are excellent. Her teachers praise her progress." "Nathan, listen to me carefully," Marvin interrupted, leaning forward with the intensity that had made him legendary in family court. "The narrative Lily's team is building is that you're so obsessed with creating the perfect child that you've forgotten to be a father. The hidden camera only reinforces that image." Nathan's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Technova's emergency line. A product launch scheduled for next week was experiencing critical software failures that required his immediate attention. The timing couldn't have been worse. His company needed him to lead emergency meetings, review code, and make decisions that would affect hundreds of employees and millions in revenue. "I have to take this," Nathan said, reaching for the phone. "No, you don't," Marvin said firmly, his hand covering Nathan's. "This is exactly the problem. Right now, at this moment, your daughter's future is more important than your business. But every instinct you have is telling you to handle the work crisis first, because that's where you feel competent and in control." The words stung because they were true. Nathan's success in technology came from his ability to analyze problems systematically and implement solutions efficiently. But parenting, real parenting, required emotional availability and intuitive understanding that he had never developed. The phone continued buzzing insistently as Nathan stared at the surveillance report spread across his desk. In the margins, Rivera had noted Emily's exceptional academic performance and made recommendations for psychological evaluation. The investigator had observed patterns that Nathan, despite his hidden cameras and careful monitoring, had completely missed. "What do we do?" Nathan asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "First, we disable that camera immediately," Marvin said. "Then we prepare for Lily's custody motion by demonstrating actual behavior change, not just good intentions. You need to be present, Nathan. Really present, not just physically in the house while working on your laptop." Nathan nodded numbly, but his mind was already racing ahead to the technological challenges facing his company. Technova's new AI platform was experiencing integration failures that could delay their launch by months, potentially costing them their competitive advantage in the market. His lead engineer, Sarah Kim, had sent 3 urgent messages about critical bugs that required his personal attention. "Nathan," Marvin's voice cut through his distraction, "you're doing it again. You're mentally checking out to focus on work problems." "This isn't just work," Nathan protested. "If Technova fails, I lose the financial stability that's my strongest argument for custody. I need to be able to provide for Emily's future." "Emily doesn't need you to be a successful CEO," Marvin said with brutal honesty. "She needs you to be a present father. The difference is that being a CEO makes you feel powerful and competent, while being a father makes you feel vulnerable and uncertain." The observation hit Nathan like a physical blow because it exposed the uncomfortable truth he had been avoiding. In boardrooms and development meetings, he was Nathan Collins, visionary entrepreneur, respected leader, problem solver extraordinaire. But in Emily's bedroom, reading bedtime stories or helping with homework, he felt awkward, inadequate, constantly second-guessing himself. His laptop chimed with an emergency video conference request from his development team. Through the screen, he could see Sarah Kim's stressed face, surrounded by other key personnel, all waiting for his guidance on critical decisions that would determine the company's immediate future. "Take the call," Marvin said quietly, observing Nathan's internal struggle. "But understand that this moment, right now, is exactly what Lily's team will use to demonstrate your priorities. Your daughter's custody hearing is in 2 weeks, and you're choosing a software problem over her future." Nathan accepted the video call, his attention immediately consumed by technical discussions about algorithm failures and integration protocols. For 45 minutes, he was completely absorbed in the familiar world of code reviews and strategic problem-solving, his mind operating with the clarity and confidence that had built his career. When the call ended, Marvin was gone, leaving only a handwritten note on Nathan's desk. "The camera needs to be removed before Emily gets home from school. Consider whether you want to tell her about it yourself or let her continue pretending she doesn't know it's there." The note's final line stopped Nathan cold. Pretending she doesn't know? He replayed Emily's comment from weeks earlier. "I hope the camera helps you feel less worried about me," and realized that his daughter had been aware of his surveillance all along. She had been performing normalcy, not just for his benefit when he was present, but for the camera that she knew was watching her every private moment. The technological genius who had built algorithms capable of predicting human behavior had been completely outmaneuvered by his 7-year-old daughter. Emily had not only detected his hidden surveillance, but had been managing his emotions through it, carefully crafting her behavior to provide him with the reassurance he desperately needed. Nathan stood at his office window, watching the snow continue to fall on the estate's grounds where Emily used to play before the divorce consumed everyone's attention. His daughter was somewhere in this house right now, probably reading books far above her grade level, while pretending to be a normal child for the benefit of adults who couldn't handle her true capabilities. He had exactly 3 hours before Emily returned from school. 3 hours to decide whether to remove the camera and pretend it had never existed, or to finally have an honest conversation with his daughter about the extraordinary person she was becoming and the father he was failing to be. The choice would determine not just the outcome of the custody battle, but the kind of relationship he would have with Emily for the rest of their lives. Nathan Collins, who had built his career on making complex decisions under pressure, had never faced a choice that felt more impossible or more important. Outside, the snow continued falling, each flake unique and unpredictable, impossible to control or manage, much like the remarkable child who was teaching him that love couldn't be systematized, monitored, or perfected through technology alone. The holiday season had transformed the Collins estate into something that resembled a picture from a luxury lifestyle magazine. Nathan had spared no expense on decorations. A 12-foot Fraser fir dominated the formal living room, adorned with crystal ornaments and LED lights that cast prismatic rainbows across the cream-colored walls. Garland wrapped around the mahogany banister, and the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air from strategically placed candles throughout the house. But as Nathan sat in his office reviewing the hidden camera footage from the previous week, he realized that the most meaningful holiday moments weren't the ones he had orchestrated. They were happening in Emily's bedroom, captured by the surveillance device he still hadn't found the courage to remove or acknowledge. On his screen, he watched Sophia enter Emily's room, carrying a small wooden box painted in vibrant blues and golds. It was December 20th, and Emily sat cross-legged on her bed, having just finished her homework with the efficient precision that Nathan was learning characterized everything she did. "What's in the box?" Emily asked, her green eyes bright with curiosity. "Something very special from my family in Santo Domingo," Sophia replied, settling beside Emily on the bed. Today is the beginning of our Christmas celebrations in the Dominican Republic. I thought you might like to learn about some of our traditions. Nathan leaned forward in his chair, intrigued. In the 3 months Sophia had worked for them, she had never mentioned her own cultural background beyond the basic biographical information from her interview. He had hired her for her qualifications and references, but he realized now that he knew almost nothing about her as a person. Sophia opened the box to reveal a collection of small nativity figures carved from dark wood, each piece painted with intricate detail and obvious care. "This was my grandmother's," she said softly. "In our family, we set up the nacimiento, the nativity scene, and each night we add another figure, telling the story as we go." "They're beautiful," Emily breathed, reaching out to touch one of the tiny figures with reverent fingers. "Can you tell me the story? Not just the Christmas story, but the story of your family and these figures." Nathan's eyebrows rose. Emily's question revealed the kind of cultural curiosity and emotional intelligence that he had never thought to nurture. When had his daughter become interested in other people's traditions and family histories? "Sí, mi amor," Sophia said, her accented English carrying warmth and pride. "My bisabuela, my great-grandmother, carved these during the Great Depression. She was very poor, but she wanted her children to understand that the most important gifts don't cost money." As Sophia began arranging the figures on Emily's nightstand, she launched into a story that was part family history, part cultural education, and part spiritual reflection. Nathan found himself completely absorbed, learning more about his employee's background in 20 minutes than he had in 3 months of professional interaction. "In our country," Sophia continued, placing a tiny figure of Mary on the miniature stable, "we believe that the spirit of Christmas lives in the connections between people. We have a saying, La familia no es solo sangre, es corazón. Family isn't just blood, it's heart." "Family is heart," Emily repeated slowly, testing out the Spanish pronunciation. "Sophia, can you teach me to say it properly?" What happened next made Nathan nearly drop his coffee cup. Sophia began speaking in rapid, fluent Spanish, and Emily responded in kind, their conversation flowing with the natural rhythm of native speakers. Nathan understood enough Spanish to catch fragments. Emily was asking detailed questions about Dominican Christmas traditions, Dominican history, and Sophia's family's journey to America. Nathan rewound the footage and played it again, this time focusing specifically on Emily's Spanish. Her pronunciation was flawless, her grammar sophisticated, her vocabulary extensive. This wasn't the basic conversational Spanish of a child who had been taking lessons for 6 months. This was the fluency of someone who had been studying the language intensively for years. But when had Emily learned Spanish? Nathan reviewed his mental catalogue of her activities: school, tutoring, piano lessons, the beginner Spanish class he paid for twice a week. None of these could account for the level of fluency he was witnessing. On screen, Emily was now helping Sophia arrange the nativity figures, while asking questions that revealed a deep understanding of Latin American culture and history. She inquired about indigenous influences in Dominican Christmas traditions, the impact of colonialism on religious practices, and the ways that immigrant families maintained cultural identity in new countries. "Emily," Sophia said, pausing in her storytelling, "how do you know so much about these things? These are not topics they teach in 2nd grade." Emily was quiet for a moment, her small fingers carefully positioning a carved wise man. "I read a lot," she said finally, "and I watched documentaries online, but also—" She hesitated, glancing toward the camera's location in a way that made Nathan's heart skip a beat. "Also what, pequeña? Sometimes I can feel what people are feeling, and it helps me understand things that aren't said out loud," Emily admitted quietly. "Like how you miss your family during the holidays, especially your grandmother who taught you to cook. And how you worry that working so far from home means you're losing pieces of who you are." Nathan watched Sophia's face. transformed from surprise to something approaching awe. Emily had just demonstrated not only cultural knowledge, but empathetic perception that bordered on mind reading. "How could you possibly know about my grandmother?" Sophia whispered. "You get this look in your eyes sometimes when you're cooking," Emily explained matter-of-factly. "Like you're remembering someone who loved you very much. And when you speak Spanish, your voice changes. It becomes softer, more musical. I think that's how you sounded when you were little, before you had to learn to be different in a new country." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, and Nathan found himself leaning closer to the screen, mesmerized by his daughter's ability to perceive and articulate emotional truths that adults spent years in therapy trying to understand. "Would you like to learn how to make pastels?" Sophia asked suddenly. "They're a traditional Christmas food from my country. Very complicated to make, but my grandmother always said that complicated recipes bring families closer together because they require patience and cooperation." "Yes," Emily exclaimed, then switched seamlessly to Spanish. "¿Puedes enseñarme también las canciones que cantabas cuando eras niña?" Sophia laughed through her tears. "Of course I can teach you the songs I sang as a child. But Emily, your Spanish is remarkable. Where did you really learn to speak so well?" Emily's expression became slightly evasive, the same look Nathan had learned to associate with her careful management of adult emotions. "I study languages the same way I study everything else," she said diplomatically. "I think they're interesting." Nathan paused the video and did a quick search on his computer. Emily's browser history, which he monitored for safety reasons, showed visits to advanced language learning websites, cultural education platforms, and academic resources about linguistics and cognitive development. She had essentially created her own immersive Spanish curriculum, complete with historical and cultural context that far exceeded anything offered in traditional children's programs. When he resumed the footage, Sophia and Emily were in the kitchen, working together to prepare ingredients for pastels. Nathan watched as Emily followed complex instructions in Spanish, her small hands working with surprising skill to prepare plantain leaves and mix spice blends according to Sophia's family recipes. "In my family," Sophia explained as they worked, "we make pastels together every Christmas Eve. Everyone has a job. The children help with simple tasks. The teenagers learn the more complicated steps, and the abuelas supervise and tell stories." "What stories do they tell?" Emily asked, carefully spreading mesa on a plantain leaf under Sophia's guidance. "Stories about the old country, about family members who came before, about the meaning of traditions," Sophia replied. "My grandmother used to say that when we cook together, we're not just making food, we're making memories and passing down love." Emily nodded seriously, as if this philosophy resonated deeply with her own understanding of family connections. "I think that's why Daddy works so much," she said quietly. "He thinks providing things is how you show love, because that's probably how his family showed love. But maybe he never learned that there are other ways." Nathan's throat tightened as his 7-year-old daughter demonstrated psychological insight that would have impressed a family therapist. She wasn't just learning about Sophia's culture, she was using that cultural education to develop a more sophisticated understanding of human motivation and family dynamics. The afternoon continued with Sophia teaching Emily traditional Christmas songs in Spanish, their voices harmonizing beautifully as they sang Los peces en el río and Campana sobre campana. Emily's pronunciation was perfect, her rhythm natural, as if she had been singing these songs her entire life. As evening approached, Nathan watched Emily carefully pack away the nativity figures in their wooden box, handling each piece with the reverence of someone who understood their cultural and familial significance. "Sophia," Emily said as they finished cleaning up, "thank you for sharing your grandmother's traditions with me. I feel like I understand you better now, and I understand myself better too." "What do you mean, mi amor?" "Well," Emily said thoughtfully, "I've been learning about lots of different cultures and languages because I want to understand how people think and feel in different parts of the world. But today I realized that understanding other people's traditions helps me figure out what traditions I want to create for my own family someday. Nathan stared at the screen, struck by the profound implications of Emily's words. While he had been focused on providing her with material advantages and academic opportunities, Emily had been conducting her own exploration of human culture and identity. She was actively constructing her own worldview by studying diverse perspectives and traditions. The camera captured one final moment that would stay with Nathan for weeks to come. As Sophia prepared to leave for the evening, Emily hugged her tightly and whispered in perfect Spanish, "Gracias por enseñarme que el amor tiene muchos idiomas. Thank you for teaching me that love has many languages." Nathan turned off the monitor and sat in the darkness of his office, overwhelmed by the realization that his daughter was developing a cultural and emotional intelligence that far exceeded his own. While he had been worried about providing her with the best education money could buy, Emily had been educating herself about the deeper aspects of human connection and cultural understanding. His 7-year-old daughter was becoming a citizen of the world, fluent not just in multiple languages, but in the universal language of empathy and cultural appreciation. And Nathan, despite all his resources and good intentions, was only beginning to understand the extraordinary person she was becoming. The January wind howled across the frozen landscape of Westchester County, rattling the windows of the Collins estate with an intensity that seemed to mirror Nathan's growing unease. It had been 2 weeks since the holiday revelations about Emily's cultural fluency, and Nathan found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about his daughter's inner world. The answer to his questions would come in the most unexpected way, through a discovery that would fundamentally challenge his understanding of childhood, intelligence, and the secret lives that even 7-year-olds could construct. The morning started routinely enough. Nathan sat in his office, reviewing the previous night's camera footage while preparing for another emergency meeting about Technova's delayed product launch. The custody hearing was now less than 3 weeks away, and the pressure from both his personal and professional crises was becoming unbearable. On screen, he watched Emily's typical evening routine, homework completed with mechanical efficiency, dinner eaten while engaging in polite conversation with Sophia, bedtime preparations conducted with the organized precision that seemed to characterize everything she did. But at 11:23 p.m., long after Sophia had retired to her room and Nathan himself had fallen asleep, Emily quietly got out of bed and moved to her desk with the stealth of someone conducting a covert operation. Nathan leaned forward, adjusting the brightness on his monitor. Emily pulled out what appeared to be an ordinary composition notebook, the kind available at any drugstore for a couple of dollars. But as she opened it and began writing by the light of her small desk lamp, Nathan could see that this was no ordinary journal. The pages were covered with symbols that definitely weren't English, Spanish, or any other language Nathan recognized. Emily was writing in some kind of code, geometric shapes, mathematical symbols, and abstract designs that formed complex patterns across the lined pages. She wrote with intense concentration, occasionally pausing to consult other notebooks hidden in her desk drawer. "What the hell?" Nathan muttered, screenshotting several frames to examine later. As Emily continued writing, she occasionally spoke to herself in whispered fragments that the camera's sensitive microphone barely captured. Nathan increased the audio and heard her working through what sounded like linguistic problems. If A equals the emotional state of confusion and B equals the behavioral response of withdrawal, then C must represent the environmental trigger, she murmured, her 7-year-old voice discussing concepts that sounded like advanced psychology or behavioral analysis. Nathan's blood ran cold as he began to understand what he was witnessing. Emily hadn't just created a secret code, she had developed her own system for analyzing and documenting human behavior. She was conducting psychological research on her own family. The session lasted for nearly an hour, with Emily filling several pages of coded observations before carefully hiding the notebooks in what appeared to be a sophisticated concealment system within her desk. She had created false bottoms in drawers and hidden compartments that would have impressed a professional spy. Nathan fast-forwarded to the next morning, watching as Emily seamlessly transitioned from secret researcher back to typical 7-year-old, greeting Sophia with cheerful enthusiasm while showing no trace of the complex intellectual work she had been conducting just hours earlier. But Nathan's focus was now entirely on those hidden notebooks. He needed to understand what Emily was documenting, what insights she was developing, and most urgently, whether her observations could potentially impact the custody proceedings. The opportunity came 3 days later when Emily was at school and Sophia was attending her weekly class at the community college. Nathan stood outside Emily's bedroom door, feeling like an intruder in his own home. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had been secretly recording his daughter for months, but physically entering her private space to examine her belongings felt like a violation of trust. The notebooks were exactly where the camera had shown Emily hiding them. Nathan's hands trembled as he opened the first one, confronted by pages of symbols that looked like a combination of mathematical equations, hieroglyphics, and abstract art. But as he studied the patterns more carefully, he began to recognize recurring symbols that seemed to represent different people. A triangle consistently appeared with what looked like stress indicators. A circle was often surrounded by work-related symbols, and a heart shape appeared frequently with both positive and negative emotional markers. In the back of the notebook, Nathan found what appeared to be a translation key. His breath caught as he realized the triangle represented him, the circle represented Lily, and the heart represented Emily herself. His daughter hadn't just created a coding system, she had developed a comprehensive methodology for analyzing family dynamics. Using the translation key, Nathan began decoding Emily's recent entries. What he read made him sink into her small desk chair, overwhelmed by the sophistication and emotional intelligence of his daughter's observations. Triangle shows increased stress markers when work symbols appear. Correlation between electronic device time and reduced heart interaction. Hypothesis: triangle uses work as emotional protection strategy when feeling inadequate in heart caregiving role. Emily had identified his tendency to retreat into work when he felt insecure about parenting. She had not only observed this pattern, but developed a psychological theory to explain it. Circle demonstrates elevated emotion markers during triangle communication events. Voice pattern analysis suggests circle experiences triangle's logical communication style as emotional rejection. Possible solution: triangle requires education in emotion expression methods. Nathan's ex-wife's frustration with his communication style had been a major factor in their divorce. But Emily had analyzed the dynamic with clinical precision and even suggested potential interventions. The most devastating entry was about Emily herself. Heart consistently modifies authentic behavior when triangle or circle present. Energy expenditure for behavior modification, creating fatigue symptoms. Heart development potentially stunted by need to manage triangle and circle emotional states. Critical need for heart to develop authentic expression in safe environment. Nathan stared at the coded text, his hands shaking as he understood that Emily was documenting her own psychological development with the detachment of a trained researcher. She had identified that constantly managing her parents' emotions was hindering her own growth, and she was tracking the impact on her well-being with scientific rigor. He flipped to earlier entries, finding months of observations that painted a comprehensive picture of family dysfunction, viewed through the lens of a child with extraordinary analytical capabilities. Emily had documented Nathan's work habits, Lily's emotional patterns, Sophia's cultural homesickness, and even the family lawyer's strategic approaches to the custody case. One entry from December made Nathan's chest tighten with guilt. Triangle installed observation device, believing Hart unaware. Hart choosing not to acknowledge device to prevent Triangle's guilt response. Triangle's need for control confirmation more important than Hart's privacy rights. Hart adapting behavior for Triangle's emotional comfort through observation device. Emily knew about the camera. She had always known, and she had been deliberately performing for it, managing Nathan's anxiety by providing him with the reassurance he needed while sacrificing her own privacy and authenticity. The most recent entries showed Emily wrestling with increasingly complex ethical and emotional questions. Hart experiencing conflict between protective instincts toward Triangle and Circle versus need for authentic development. Hart's exceptional capabilities creating isolation effect. Question: how to reveal authentic self without causing Triangle and Circle additional stress during legal conflict period. Nathan closed the notebook and sat in Emily's child-sized chair, surrounded by unicorn decorations and stuffed animals, trying to process the reality that his 7-year-old daughter was conducting psychological analysis that would have impressed graduate students in behavioral science. Emily wasn't just gifted, she was operating on a level of intellectual and emotional sophistication that challenged fundamental assumptions about child development. She had created her own research methodology, developed her own theoretical frameworks, and was applying scientific rigor to understanding human behavior and family dynamics. But the most heartbreaking realization was that Emily was doing all of this in isolation. Her extraordinary capabilities had created a barrier between her and every other child her age, and her desire to protect her parents' feelings was preventing her from seeking adult guidance or support. Nathan carefully returned the notebooks to their hiding places, his mind racing with implications. Emily's coded observations could potentially provide insights that would help resolve the custody dispute, but using them would mean betraying her trust and violating the privacy she had worked so hard to maintain. As he left Emily's room, Nathan caught sight of himself in her vanity mirror, the same mirror that concealed the hidden camera. For the first time, he saw himself as Emily saw him, a well-intentioned but emotionally limited adult who had been so focused on providing material security that he had failed to create the emotional safety his daughter needed to reveal her true self. The triangle in Emily's code representing him was about to face the most challenging equation of his life. How could he honor his daughter's extraordinary capabilities while providing the unconditional love and acceptance she needed to develop authentically? The answer, Nathan was beginning to realize, would require him to become a different kind of father, one who could embrace uncertainty, vulnerability, and the humbling truth that his 7-year-old daughter understood human nature better than he did. The February storm that battered the Collins estate seemed to mirror the emotional tempest brewing within its walls. Nathan had spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with the knowledge of Emily's secret journal, but nothing could have prepared him for what the hidden camera would reveal on this gray, rain-soaked Thursday evening. It was 7:47 p.m. when Nathan, exhausted from another crisis meeting about Technova's failing product launch, settled into his office chair to review the day's footage. The custody hearing was now just 10 days away, and his attorney had been pressuring him for any evidence that might strengthen his case. But as Nathan watched the events unfold on his monitor, he realized he was about to witness something that would change his understanding of his daughter forever. On screen, Emily sat at her small desk, having just finished her homework with the methodical precision he had come to expect. Sophia was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and the house was filled with the comfortable sounds of domestic routine, the distant clatter of dishes, the soft hum of the heating system, the gentle patter of rain against the windows. But then Emily did something that made Nathan's blood freeze. She turned toward the camera's location and spoke directly to it, her green eyes seeming to look straight through the lens and into his soul. "I know you're watching, Daddy," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight of sadness that no 7-year-old should possess. "I've always known. I need to tell you something, but I don't know how to say it when you're here because you get scared when I'm different from what you expect." Nathan's hands trembled as he reached for his coffee cup, his eyes fixed on his daughter's face. Emily looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying burdens too heavy for small shoulders. "I can feel things," Emily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just emotions, but other things. Things that haven't happened yet. And I think you need to know because the custody hearing is coming. And everyone's making decisions about my life based on what they think I need. But nobody knows what I really am." Nathan leaned forward, his heart pounding as Emily's words registered. "Feel things that haven't happened yet." What was she talking about? Emily stood up and moved to her window, gazing out at the storm-tossed trees that bordered the estate. When she spoke again, her voice carried a maturity that seemed to add years to her age. "Tomorrow morning at 9:23, Mrs. Henderson is going to call the school nurse because Tommy Martinez is going to have an asthma attack during PE class," she said matter-of-factly. "At 11:40, the fire alarm will go off because of a malfunction in the East Wing kitchen. And at 2:15, Principal Walsh will announce that school will be dismissed early because of the storm that's coming." Nathan paused the video, his mind reeling. These were specific predictions with exact times. Either Emily was having some kind of psychological episode or he couldn't even finish the thought. The alternative was too impossible to consider. He resumed the footage, watching as Emily returned to her desk and pulled out one of her coded notebooks. But this time, instead of writing in symbols, she began speaking directly to the camera while making notes. "I've been tracking patterns for months," she explained, her voice taking on the clinical tone of a researcher presenting data. "Weather patterns, behavioral patterns, probability cascades. At first, I thought everyone could see these things and just chose not to talk about them. But then I realized that most people can only see what's happening now, not what's going to happen." Emily opened another notebook, this one filled with what appeared to be prediction logs, dates, times, and brief descriptions of events, many of which had check marks beside them indicating accuracy. "I predicted that Mommy would call on Tuesday night crying about her art exhibition 3 days before she actually did," Emily continued, showing the relevant page to the camera. "I knew that Sophia's grandmother was going to get sick, and Sophia would need to take time off 2 weeks before it happened. And I knew that your meeting with the Japanese investors would be postponed because of their CEO's health concerns a full week before you got that phone call." Nathan's throat constricted as he remembered these events. Emily was right about all of them. At the time, he had attributed the coincidences to Emily's perceptive nature, or lucky guesses. But if she had documented these predictions in advance, the hardest part, Emily said, her voice breaking slightly, is knowing things that will hurt people and not being able to prevent them. Like knowing that you and Mommy were going to get divorced 6 months before you told me. Or knowing that Grandpa Collins is going to get really sick next month, even though he feels fine right now. Nathan's father. Emily was predicting that his father would become ill. Nathan's hands shook as he reached for his phone to call his parents, then stopped. What would he say? That his 7-year-old daughter had a premonition. On screen, Emily wiped tears from her eyes, but continued her explanation with the stoic determination of someone far older than her years. "I tried to change things sometimes," she admitted. "Like when I knew Tommy was going to fall off the monkey bars and break his arm. I distracted him by asking him to help me with something else. Or when I saw that Mrs. Chen was going to trip on the front steps, I made sure to spill some water there so she'd be extra careful walking." Nathan realized that Emily had been quietly preventing accidents and managing outcomes while appearing to live a normal childhood. She had been operating as a guardian angel for everyone around her, using her apparent abilities to minimize harm and protect the people she loved. "But the biggest thing I can see," Emily continued, her voice dropping to barely audible, "is about the custody hearing. I know what's going to happen, and I know that everyone thinks they're fighting for what's best for me, but they don't understand what I actually need." She turned back toward the camera, her green eyes filled with a wisdom that seemed ancient in her young face. "Daddy, you think that if you win custody, you'll finally prove that you're a good father. But winning won't fix the scared feeling you have inside that makes you work so much. And Mommy thinks that if she wins, she'll be able to give me the creative, emotional environment I need. But she doesn't realize that her sadness about the divorce affects me more than any environment could." Emily picked up a fresh notebook and began writing as she spoke, creating what appeared to be a comprehensive analysis of the custody situation. "The truth is, I don't need either of you to win," she said quietly. "I need both of you to heal. Because when adults are broken inside, children absorb that brokenness, even when the adults think they're hiding it." Nathan paused the video again, his mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. His 7-year-old daughter was demonstrating not just predictive abilities, but a psychological understanding of family dynamics that exceeded anything he had learned in years of therapy and counseling. When he resumed the footage, Emily was showing a page of her notebook to the camera, a detailed plan that looked like a strategic business proposal. "I've been working on a solution," she explained. "If I can help you and Mommy understand what you really need to feel better about yourselves as parents, maybe you'll stop fighting about who gets to take care of me and start working together to actually take care of me." The plan was sophisticated, outlining specific interventions designed to address both Nathan's emotional avoidance and Lily's post-divorce depression. Emily had identified therapeutic approaches, communication strategies, and even practical solutions like shared custody arrangements that prioritized stability over legal victory. "The problem is," Emily continued, "I can't tell you about this plan directly because you're not ready to believe that I can see these things. Adults have very fixed ideas about what children can and can't do. So I have to find a way to guide you toward these realizations without revealing how I know them." Nathan stared at the screen, overwhelmed by the implications of what he was learning. Emily wasn't just intellectually gifted. She appeared to possess abilities that challenged basic assumptions about the nature of consciousness, time, and human perception. The most devastating moment came when Emily looked directly into the camera with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I have to hide who I really am," she whispered. "I know it makes you worry that I'm not normal, and I know you blame yourself for not understanding me better. But I hide because I love you, and I don't want my differences to make you feel like you failed as a father." Emily wiped her eyes and began returning her notebooks to their hiding places, her movements careful and practiced. "Tomorrow, I'm going to act surprised when Tommy has his asthma attack and when the fire alarm goes off early," she said matter-of-factly. "And I'm going to pretend I don't know that you've been watching me with the camera, because you need to feel like you're protecting me, even though I've been protecting all of you." As Emily prepared for bed, she turned once more toward the camera's location. "I love you, Daddy," she said softly. "And I hope someday you'll love me enough to let me be who I really am, instead of who you think I should be." Nathan turned off the monitor and sat in the darkness of his office, his worldview completely shattered. His daughter possessed abilities that he couldn't understand, couldn't explain, and couldn't protect her from. She was living a double life, not out of rebellion or deception, but out of a desire to protect the adults around her from truths they weren't equipped to handle. The custody hearing that had consumed his thoughts for months suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the much larger question. How could he be a father to a child whose capabilities exceeded his own understanding of what was possible? Emily wasn't just exceptional. She might be something unprecedented. And Nathan, with all his technology and resources and good intentions, had never felt more powerless or more determined to become worthy of the extraordinary trust his daughter had placed in him. The morning of February 15th dawned crisp and clear, but Nathan Collins felt as though he was drowning in uncertainty. Emily's predictions from the previous evening played in his mind like a haunting refrain as he sat in his office watching the school day unfold through her hidden camera. At exactly 9:23 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from the school nurse. Tommy Martinez had an asthma attack during PE. He's fine, but we wanted you to know Emily was very helpful in keeping him calm. Nathan's hands trembled as he checked the timestamp. Emily had predicted this to the minute. At 11:40 a.m., the fire alarm sounded at Riverside Academy, exactly as Emily had foretold. And at 2:15 p.m., Principal Walsh's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing early dismissal due to the approaching storm system. By the time Emily arrived home that afternoon, Nathan felt as though he was living in a reality that had shifted fundamentally off its axis. He watched through the camera as Emily greeted Sophia with her usual cheerful demeanor, showing no sign that she had just demonstrated abilities that challenged the basic laws of causality and perception. But what Nathan witnessed that evening would prove even more disturbing than Emily's apparent prescient abilities. It would reveal the true extent of her emotional burden and the sophisticated ways she had been managing the adults in her life. The revelation began at 8:30 p.m., during what appeared to be a routine bedtime conversation between Emily and Sophia. They were discussing Emily's school day, with Emily providing perfectly normal 7-year-old responses about playground activities and classroom lessons. But Nathan noticed something subtle in Emily's body language, a tension around her eyes, a careful modulation of her voice that suggested she was performing rather than simply conversing. "Sophia," Emily said suddenly, her tone shifting to something more serious, "can I ask you about something that's been worrying me?" "Of course, mi amor. What's troubling you?" Emily fidgeted with the edge of her comforter, her green eyes reflecting a calculated vulnerability that made Nathan's stomach clench with unease. "I've been having bad dreams about Daddy," Emily said quietly. "Dreams where he's so worried about work and the custody stuff that he gets really sick from all the stress." Nathan leaned forward, studying his daughter's expression. Was she genuinely concerned, or was this another example of her managing adult emotions through strategic revelation? Sophia's face immediately filled with concern. "What kind of dreams, pequeña?" Dreams where his heart stops working because he never rests," Emily continued, her voice breaking in exactly the way that would maximize Sophia's protective instincts. "I'm scared that if I tell him about the dreams, it will make him more worried. But I'm also scared that if I don't tell him, something bad will happen." Nathan watched Sophia's reaction with growing unease. The young woman was clearly moved by Emily's apparent distress, but Nathan was beginning to recognize the sophisticated emotional manipulation underlying his daughter's words. Emily was providing Sophia with information designed to influence her behavior, specifically to encourage Sophia to express concerns about Nathan's well-being that would ultimately reach Nathan himself. "Perhaps we should mention your concerns to your father," Sophia suggested, exactly as Emily had likely predicted she would. "Sometimes children notice things about their parents that adults miss. Would you talk to him?" Emily asked, her voice small and helpless. "I don't think he listens to me the same way he listens to grown-ups." Nathan's chest tightened as he realized the depth of Emily's strategic thinking. She was using Sophia as an intermediary to communicate concerns that would carry more weight coming from an adult than from a 7-year-old. But the most disturbing aspect was Emily's apparent ability to manufacture authentic-seeming emotional responses to achieve her objectives. The conversation continued with Emily providing Sophia with carefully calibrated information about Nathan's work habits, his sleep patterns, and his stress levels. Each revelation was designed to paint a picture of a father in crisis who needed intervention. But the information was presented in a way that seemed to come from innocent childhood observation, rather than sophisticated psychological analysis. "He stays up really late working on his computer," Emily said with perfectly performed worry. "And sometimes I hear him on phone calls where he sounds angry or scared. I think he's trying to protect me from seeing how upset he is, but that makes me more scared, not less scared." Sophia nodded sympathetically, clearly already planning how to address these concerns with Nathan. Emily had successfully enlisted an ally in her campaign to modify her father's behavior, and she had done it in a way that made Sophia feel like the intervention was her own idea. But the true revelation of Emily's manipulative capabilities came later that evening, after Sophia had gone to her room. Nathan watched as Emily pulled out her phone, a basic device he had given her for emergencies, and began making a call that he had not authorized and did not expect. "Hi, Mommy," Emily said when Lily answered, her voice immediately shifting to a different emotional register. With Sophia, she had been worried and vulnerable. With her mother, she became artistic and whimsical. "Emily! Sweetheart, this is a surprise. Is everything okay?" "I'm okay," Emily said, settling cross-legged on her bed with the casual ease of someone conducting routine business. "I was just thinking about the custody hearing, and I wanted to ask you something." Nathan's heart rate spiked. Emily was calling Lily directly about the custody case without Nathan's knowledge or permission. "What about the hearing, baby?" Lily's voice carried the tension that always surfaced when custody matters were discussed. "Well," Emily said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about how sad you get sometimes, and I was wondering if you've been taking care of yourself. You know, like eating good food and getting enough sleep and maybe talking to someone about your feelings." Nathan watched as Emily deployed the same strategic emotional intelligence she had used with Sophia, but tailored specifically to Lily's psychological profile. She was expressing concern for her mother's well-being while subtly suggesting that Lily needed to address her own emotional state. "I'm doing okay, sweetheart," Lily replied, but her voice carried the strain that Emily had undoubtedly detected. "Why do you ask?" "No, because I worry that you're so focused on taking care of me that you forget to take care of yourself," Emily said with devastating accuracy. "And I think maybe the reason you and Daddy fight so much is because you're both scared and sad about different things, but you don't know how to help each other feel better." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Emily systematically identifying Lily's emotional vulnerabilities while providing gentle guidance toward healthier coping strategies. She suggested that Lily reconnect with old friends, consider therapy, and focus on her art as a form of healing rather than escape. Most remarkably, Emily managed to convey these recommendations in the language of a concerned 7-year-old, rather than a trained therapist. She asked innocent questions that led Lily to her own realizations, expressed childlike observations that contained profound psychological insights, and offered emotional support that seemed genuine despite its strategic nature. "Emily," Lily said near the end of the call, her voice filled with wonder, "you're such a wise little girl. How did you get so good at understanding people's feelings?" "I just pay attention," Emily replied simply. "And I love you and Daddy, so I want you both to be happy." After ending the call, Emily sat quietly for several minutes, and for the first time that evening, Nathan saw her authentic emotional state. She looked exhausted, drained in a way that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. The mask of childhood had slipped, revealing the immense psychological burden she carried. Emily pulled out one of her coded notebooks and began writing with rapid, almost frantic movements. Nathan couldn't decipher the symbols, but the emotional intensity of her writing was unmistakable. She was documenting not just her observations and predictions, but her own emotional responses to the constant performance of managing adult emotions. The most heartbreaking moment came when Emily closed the notebook and spoke directly to the camera once again. "I don't want to be manipulative," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want to have to manage everyone's feelings all the time. I just want to be a regular kid who can make mistakes and be silly and not worry about whether everything I say or do is going to make the grown-ups more scared or more sad." Emily wiped her eyes and continued, her voice carrying a maturity that seemed impossibly heavy for her small frame. "But when you can see how much pain people are in, and when you know that small changes could make them feel better, how do you not try to help? Even if helping means you can never just be yourself?" She looked directly into the camera lens, her green eyes filled with a loneliness that made Nathan's chest ache. "I love you, Daddy. And I love Mommy too. But I'm tired of being the only one in this family who knows how to love without making it about winning or losing, or being right or wrong." Nathan turned off the monitor and sat in the darkness, overwhelmed by the realization that his 7-year-old daughter had been operating as an unpaid family therapist, using sophisticated psychological manipulation to guide the adults in her life toward better emotional health. Emily wasn't just intellectually gifted or empathically sensitive, she was a master manipulator who used her abilities in service of love rather than personal gain. But the cost of her constant emotional labor was clearly taking a toll on her own development and well-being. The custody hearing was 5 days away, and Nathan suddenly understood that the real question wasn't who would win legal custody of Emily. The question was whether any of the adults in her life were capable of providing her with the emotional safety she needed to stop managing everyone else's feelings and start exploring her own authentic self. Nathan Collins, who had built his career on understanding complex systems, was beginning to realize that the most complex system in his life was the extraordinary 7-year-old girl who had been quietly holding his family together while sacrificing her own childhood in the process. The August heat pressed down on Westchester County like a suffocating blanket. But inside the Collins estate, the air conditioning hummed steadily, maintaining the perfect climate control that Nathan had always believed was essential for productivity and comfort. 6 months had passed since the custody hearing, a hearing that had ended in shared custody after both Nathan and Lily underwent court-mandated therapy and parenting classes. But as Nathan sat in his office on this sweltering Tuesday evening, he was about to witness something that would render all legal decisions and therapeutic interventions insignificant by comparison. The hidden camera had remained in place despite Nathan's repeated promises to himself that he would remove it. Each time he approached Emily's room with the intention of dismantling his surveillance system, he found himself paralyzed by the fear of losing the window into his daughter's extraordinary inner world. The footage had become his education in understanding a child whose capabilities continued to exceed every assumption about childhood development. Tonight's revelation began at 9:15 p.m. During what Nathan had learned to recognize as Emily's authentic time, the period after Sophia's departure, when Emily felt safe to drop her careful performance of normalcy. But instead of reaching for her coded journals or advanced textbooks, Emily did something that made Nathan's breath catch in his throat. She began talking to someone who wasn't there. "I know you're worried about tomorrow," Emily said softly, sitting cross-legged on her bed and gazing toward the corner of her room where no one stood. But Mrs. Patterson is going to be okay. The surgery will go better than the doctors expect. Nathan leaned forward, adjusting his monitor settings and checking the camera angles. Emily appeared to be having a conversation with an invisible presence. Her responses suggesting she was receiving information that he couldn't detect. Yes, I'll make sure to remind Sophia to call her sister. Emily continued, nodding as if receiving instructions. And I'll find a way to let Daddy know that he should invest in the renewable energy company. But I'll have to be careful about how I do it so he doesn't get suspicious. Nathan's hands began to tremble as he realized that Emily wasn't just predicting future events. She appeared to be receiving guidance about how to influence outcomes. But from whom and how? Emily's conversation continued for several minutes, with her asking questions and responding to answers that Nathan couldn't hear. Her side of the dialogue revealed an ongoing relationship with some kind of advisory presence that provided her with information about future events and guidance, about how to navigate complex situations. I understand that I can't prevent everything, Emily said, her voice carrying the patient tone of someone who had heard this instruction many times before. But it's hard to watch people make choices that will hurt them when I know what will happen. She paused, listening intently to something Nathan couldn't perceive. You're right, she continued. Free will is more important than preventing pain. But can I at least try to help them make better choices by giving them better information? Nathan screenshot several frames, studying Emily's facial expressions and body language. She showed none of the signs of childhood imagination or make-believe that might explain this behavior. Her responses were too specific, too sophisticated, too consistent with her demonstrated abilities to be dismissed as fantasy. The conversation took a turn that made Nathan's blood run cold. About the camera, Emily said suddenly, glancing directly toward the lens with those piercing green eyes. I know Daddy thinks I don't know about it, but I've always known. Should I tell him? Or should I wait until he's ready to understand what it really means that I know? Emily listened for several moments, then nodded with understanding. You're right. He's not ready yet. He still thinks this is about him monitoring me, but really, it's about me helping him learn to see beyond his limitations. The camera isn't his tool for watching me. It's my tool for teaching him. Nathan's worldview crumbled completely. Emily hadn't just been aware of his surveillance. She had been using it as a method of education, carefully crafting her behaviors to provide him with the insights he needed to become a better father. She had turned his attempt to monitor her into her method of guiding his personal growth. The hardest part, Emily continued, is pretending to be surprised by things I already know will happen. Like tomorrow when Grandpa Collins calls with news about his test results. I've known for weeks that they're going to find the early signs of heart disease, but I have to act shocked and worried so that Daddy doesn't realize I saw it coming. Nathan's father's medical appointment. Emily was predicting specific medical findings that hadn't yet been discovered. If she was right about this, if his father's upcoming cardiac screening revealed early heart disease, then Nathan would have to accept that his daughter possessed abilities that transcended normal human perception. I know Daddy loves me, Emily said, her voice growing soft with genuine emotion. But he loves the idea of me more than he loves who I really am. He wants me to be special in ways that make sense to him. Smart, accomplished, successful in school. But the ways I'm actually special scare him because they don't fit into his understanding of how the world works. Emily shifted position on her bed, drawing her knees to her chest in a posture that made her look very young and vulnerable. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to just be a regular kid, she admitted. To not know what people are feeling all the time, or what's going to happen next week, or how to solve everyone's problems. To just play and learn and make mistakes without having to think about the consequences for everyone around me. She paused, apparently listening to a response that offered comfort. I know my abilities are gifts, "And I know they're meant to help people," Emily said. "But sometimes gifts feel like burdens, especially when you're 7 years old and everyone expects you to be normal." The invisible conversation concluded with Emily receiving what appeared to be specific instructions about the following day's events. She nodded seriously, asked several clarifying questions, and then said goodbye to her unseen advisor with the formal courtesy of someone concluding a business meeting. After the mysterious conversation ended, Emily pulled out a notebook, not one of her coded journals, but a simple composition book with a unicorn on the cover. Nathan watched as she began writing in perfectly legible English, documenting what appeared to be a detailed plan for the next several weeks. The plan included specific interventions designed to help Nathan overcome his emotional limitations, strategies for supporting Lily through her ongoing depression, and methods for managing Sophia's homesickness and academic stress. Emily had created a comprehensive therapeutic program for her entire family, complete with timelines, measurable objectives, and contingency plans for various scenarios. Most remarkably, the plan included provisions for gradually revealing her true capabilities to the adults in her life, but only after careful preparation designed to help them accept what they would witness. Phase 1. Demonstrate predictive accuracy through seemingly coincidental observations, Emily had written. Phase 2. Introduce concepts of enhanced perception through academic discussions. Phase 3. Reveal documentation of abilities after adults have developed framework for understanding. Emily was orchestrating her own coming-out process, managing not just the revelation of her abilities, but the psychological preparation necessary for the adults to accept them without being overwhelmed or frightened. The final entry in her plan made Nathan's chest tighten with emotion. Ultimate objective: create safe environment where authentic self can emerge without causing family destabilization. Success metric: Daddy and Mommy love Emily as she is, rather than Emily as they want her to be. Nathan turned off the monitor and sat in the silence of his office, overwhelmed by the realization that his daughter was not just extraordinary. She was operating on a level of consciousness that challenged fundamental assumptions about human capability and childhood development. Emily possessed abilities that bordered on the supernatural, but she was using those gifts with the wisdom and compassion of an enlightened being. She had been quietly guiding her family's healing process while protecting them from truths they weren't ready to handle. The custody battle, the therapy sessions, the careful legal maneuvering, all of it had been secondary to the real work that Emily had been doing. She had been teaching the adults in her life how to love more authentically, communicate more honestly, and release their need to control outcomes they couldn't understand. Nathan finally understood that the camera he had installed to monitor Emily's safety had instead become a window into the most profound education of his life. His 7-year-old daughter had been his teacher all along, patiently guiding him toward a deeper understanding of love, consciousness, and the infinite potential that exists within every human being. The question that remained was whether Nathan Collins, successful entrepreneur, rational thinker, and deeply flawed father, was finally ready to become a student worthy of the extraordinary teacher who had been waiting for him to recognize her true nature. Tomorrow would bring his father's medical results, and with them, the first real test of Nathan's willingness to believe in possibilities that exceeded his understanding. The future of his relationship with Emily, and perhaps the future of Emily herself, would depend on his courage to embrace a reality far more magical and complex than anything his technology-focused mind had ever imagined. The late August sun streamed through the windows of Nathan's office as he stared at his phone, his father's voice still echoing in his mind from the call that had ended moments earlier. Dr. Collins's routine cardiac screening had revealed early-stage coronary artery disease, exactly as Emily had predicted 3 weeks ago. The medical findings were treatable, caught early enough to prevent serious complications. But Nathan felt as though the ground beneath his feet had shifted permanently. Emily's prediction had been precise, specific and impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Nathan could no longer rationalize away his daughter's abilities or pretend that what he was witnessing fell within the bounds of normal childhood development. The time for denial had ended, replaced by a terrifying and liberating acceptance of a reality that challenged everything he thought he knew about consciousness, perception, and the nature of human potential. The custody arrangement had been in place for 6 months now, with Emily splitting her time between Nathan's estate and Lily's renovated loft in the city. The shared custody had forced both parents into therapy and parenting classes, but more importantly, it had created space for Emily to begin revealing her authentic self in carefully measured increments. Nathan stood outside Emily's bedroom door, his hand trembling as he reached for the handle.
It
was 3:30 p.m. on a Thursday, Emily's time with him during the week. Sophia was attending her final class before graduating with her degree in child psychology, an achievement that Emily had somehow known would happen 6 months before Sophia even applied to the program. He found Emily sitting at her desk, but for the first time since installing the camera, she wasn't performing for his benefit or hiding her advanced materials. Instead, she was openly working with graduate-level texts on consciousness studies, quantum physics, and developmental psychology. Her coded journals lay beside her, no longer concealed but organized with the precision of a professional researcher. "Hi, Daddy," Emily said without looking up from her work, her voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had been expecting this moment. "I know about Grandpa's test results. Are you ready to talk about how I know?" Nathan's legs felt weak as he moved into the room and sat on Emily's bed. The unicorn decorations and stuffed animals that had once seemed so incongruously childlike now appeared to be carefully maintained props in an elaborate performance that was finally coming to an end. "Emily," Nathan said quietly, his voice barely steady, "I need you to help me understand what's happening. What you are. What I've been seeing." Emily set down her pen and turned to face him, her green eyes reflecting a depth of wisdom that seemed to contain lifetimes of experience. At 7 years old, she possessed the presence of someone far older, but without losing the essential innocence that made her unmistakably a child. "I can perceive information across different temporal frameworks," Emily said simply, using language that was simultaneously sophisticated and matter-of-fact. "What most people call the future isn't really future. It's just information that exists in a different dimensional space that some consciousnesses can access." Nathan stared at his daughter, struggling to process her explanation. "How long have you been able to do this?" "Always," Emily replied. "But I didn't understand that other people couldn't until I was about 4. That's when I realized that saying things before they happened made adults uncomfortable. So I learned to pretend I was surprised by events I had already seen." Emily pulled out one of her coded journals and opened it to a page covered with complex diagrams and symbols. "I developed the coding system to document my observations without creating evidence that would frighten people. But I also used it to track patterns in how my abilities work and how they affect the people around me." "The conversation I witnessed," Nathan said carefully. "The one where you seemed to be talking to someone who wasn't there. Who were you speaking with?" Emily's expression became thoughtful, as if she was considering how much truth Nathan was prepared to handle. "There are consciousnesses that exist in different dimensional frameworks," she said slowly. "Some people might call them guides or angels, but those terms carry religious implications that don't accurately describe the phenomenon. They're simply beings who have developed beyond the limitations of linear time and physical embodiment." Nathan felt his rational mind rebelling against Emily's explanation, but the evidence of her abilities was too overwhelming to dismiss. "Why you?" he asked. "Why do you have these capabilities?" I don't know if it's random or purposeful, Emily admitted. But I think some consciousnesses incarnate with expanded abilities when their presence is needed to help other people grow beyond their current limitations. Maybe I'm here to help you and Mommy learn that love doesn't require understanding everything about the person you love. The simplicity and profundity of her words hit Nathan like a physical force. Emily wasn't just explaining her abilities, she was articulating the central challenge of their relationship. His love for her had been conditional on his ability to understand and categorize her capabilities within his existing worldview. "I'm scared," Nathan admitted, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to be a father to someone like you. I don't know how to protect you or guide you or help you when you understand things that I can't even comprehend." Emily stood up and moved to sit beside him on the bed, her small hand finding his with the gentle assurance of someone offering comfort to a frightened child. "You don't have to understand everything about me to love me," she said softly. "You just have to accept that I'm different and trust that being different doesn't mean being wrong or dangerous or broken." Nathan looked around. Emily's room, at the advanced textbooks that were no longer hidden, at the coded journals that documented abilities beyond normal human experience, at the carefully maintained facade of childhood that was finally being dismantled. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "How can I help you?" "I need you to stop trying to fix me or manage me or turn me into the kind of daughter you thought you wanted," Emily said with gentle honesty. "I need you to be curious about who I really am, instead of frightened by what I can do. And I need you to understand that my abilities come with responsibilities that sometimes require me to make choices that might not make sense from a normal perspective." Nathan nodded, tears streaming down his face as he began to grasp the enormous burden his daughter had been carrying. "The camera," he said suddenly. "You've known about it all along." "I've been using it to teach you," Emily confirmed. "Every behavior you witnessed, every conversation you recorded, I crafted all of it to help you gradually understand my capabilities without overwhelming you. The camera wasn't your tool for monitoring me. It was my tool for educating you." The revelation hit Nathan with stunning force. His sophisticated surveillance system had been turned into Emily's method of parental education. She had been conducting a months-long therapeutic intervention designed to prepare him for this moment of truth. The coded journals, the advanced reading, the predictions. You revealed all of it gradually so I would have time to adjust, Nathan realized. I had to help you build a framework for understanding before I could show you the full scope of what I can do, Emily explained. If I had told you everything at once, you would have either dismissed it as childhood fantasy or become so frightened that you couldn't function as my father. Nathan pulled Emily into his arms, holding her with a desperate tenderness that contained months of accumulated love, fear, and wonder. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry you had to carry this alone. I'm sorry you had to manage my emotions while hiding who you really are." "I wasn't alone," Emily said simply. "I had guidance and I had purpose, but it will be easier now that you know. Now I can start teaching you about the bigger things." "Bigger things?" Emily pulled back to look at him, her eyes bright with excitement for the first time in months. "Daddy, what I can do isn't that unusual. There are lots of people with expanded abilities, but most of them hide because the world isn't ready to accept that consciousness can operate beyond the limitations that most people think are fixed." She gestured toward her notebooks and textbooks. "I've been studying how to help people develop their own abilities. What if instead of just predicting events, I could teach other people how to perceive beyond linear time? What if instead of just managing emotions, I could help people develop their own empathic capabilities?" Nathan stared at his daughter, beginning to understand that her abilities weren't just personal gifts. They were part of a larger transformation in human consciousness that she was here to facilitate. "You're not just my daughter," he said with growing wonder. You're here to change how people understand what's possible." Emily smiled, the first truly unguarded, genuinely joyful expression Nathan had seen from her in months. "Now you're starting to understand," she said. "But first I need to help you and Mommy heal completely. Because you can't teach other people about love and consciousness if you're still scared of your own emotions." Nathan nodded, feeling a mixture of terror and anticipation about the journey ahead. His daughter was extraordinary in ways that challenged the basic assumptions of human existence. But she was still 7 years old, still his responsibility, still the most important person in his world. The difference was that now he could love her authentically, not the daughter he had imagined, but the remarkable being she actually was. And perhaps, if he was brave enough to grow beyond his own limitations, she would teach him how to become extraordinary too. Outside, the August afternoon was fading into evening, but inside Emily's room, a new chapter was beginning. One built on truth, acceptance, and the infinite possibility that emerges when love transcends understanding. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and if you watched this far, comment "I watched until the end," and leave your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's very exciting for you.